Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the VMware Networking and Security live stream. We are live right now on Twitch, and we are live on YouTube. So just want to say welcome back. Last week, we had a fantastic episode with Chris McCain talking about NSX mindset. And now this week, we're going to bring on somebody that I have known now for a little bit over at VMware, back even when I was a customer. And he worked with me tirelessly on a lot of different things when I would have questions about NSXV and NSXT. And I wanted to bring him onto the show because he's a lot of fun to talk to. And we're going to be talking about basically private cloud and a bunch of other subjects that we organically go to. So without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Andrew Voltmer. How you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So now this is going to be fun because now it's the two Andrews on stream live.
Yeah, that's right. And for the people on the stream, we were thinking about hiring Andrew to come over work at VMware, but I had to object because I was the only Andrew, and
It's true. It's true.
That
was actually listed. It was listed on there. It's like we cannot hire him because we can't have two Andrews.
Well, yeah, and all of 30,000 people at VMware.
Exactly. That's the vetting process. Make sure you don't overlap with a name.
Yeah, there we go. Although I can change my name to Andy if you want.
Perfect. So, Andrew, I like to always start this off with a little bit of the history of, who are you? Where'd you come from? How'd you get over to VMware? And what do you do?
Okay, so let's see. I'm Senior Director of Product Management, big long title here at VMware. I do NSX as my product. I'm coming up on 10 years in like a day or two, something like that, coming up. Today's August 2nd, I think the 4th. I got hired when there was no NSX. We launched NSX just after I started back in 2013 at what was then known as VMware, VMworld, now known as VMware Explorer. See, I can't even get that right. The rebranding, but it's been a really amazing run, and running the product, developing the product, making it successful over the years. And but yeah, I'm part of the product management team. So to be more specific, I run the networking part of the product and the platform part of the product. I have a counterpart who focuses on the security features.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So, when you're talking about you've seen the whole world of NSX as it started off with NSXV and then moved into NSXT. So you've seen that journey. What would you say is the most interesting part of that journey as it's moved on in the product?
Well, the product has clearly evolved over time. It's sort of funny. There are multiple versions of NSX out there. And I don't mean versions like 1.0, 2.0, but multiple flavors of NSX. And I don't know if you want a little history of it, but
sure.
Originally we had a product at VMware called vCNS, vCloud Networking Security. And we bought a company about 11 years ago called Nicira. And we took some of the Nicira technology and we merged it with the vCNS product, which created a product called NSX for vSphere, or internally we use the slang NSXV. But at the same time, we knew that product was never going to evolve to where we wanted it to be. It didn't have the scalability, it didn't have the feature set. We wanted to support things like containers and bare metal servers and public cloud workloads, all these other features. And so we decided to build a net new product, which is known as NSXT originally, or Transformers was the code name. And that's the mainline product today. And it's both of them, NSXV and NSXT, using the slang, have been incredibly successful over that 10-year period.
So what would you say is the most successful component about NSX? And I think I'm starting to lead into the main theme here. So what do you think? What do you think is the main advantage of it?
Well, so one of the most amazing things about NSX is it's a software-based solution for networking and security, and some people call these SDN, software-defined networking. But what it means is that you can use NSX to provide connectivity and security to build your own private cloud. And a private cloud to me is an environment where if you're an IT organization, you have data centers and you want to do self-service for your users, whoever your users are, you can build them a cloud and give them that self-service experience. And NSX does the connectivity for your virtual machines or your containers or your physical servers, and it secures them. And so we have an amazing feature called the distributed firewall, which puts the security into the kernel of the hypervisor and protects virtual machines in a way that really no other product can do.
So I want to get a little bit deeper because I think this is a good way of starting to talk about the changes. And I always say networking has gone through some massive changes. One of
Oh
the
yeah.
biggest ones I would say is, how we used to manage data centers back in the day versus now. What is the difference between how we manage data centers back, I don't know, 15, 20 years now to now in a software defined, in a private cloud sense? Like, why is it so different?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm gonna go back in my history. Before I worked in product management, I was an IT practitioner, I'll call it. I ran a team who ran data center stuff. We had on my team, I had compute, storage, networking, security, help desk, basically the IT operations group and architecture. We weren't the applications team, that was usually divided into a different group. And sort of the way we did things back then, I mean, this is even before virtualization of compute existed, was some finance departments say they need a new application to do, tracking accounts payable or something, and they'd come to us and they'd put a ticket into a ticketing system, and then we'd go and allocate budget and order servers and grab the CD-ROM if anybody remembers what those are. Put it in the server, install the OS. We basically build these monolithic systems that are dedicated to these specific applications, whether or not it's an off-the-shelf application or internally built application. And so the process was very long and involved. It involved multiple people. The tickets would bounce around between people or spawn sub tickets in our ticketing system that we used back then. And, I would say it would take days, weeks, even months, depending on the application. I remember we stood up a PeopleSoft instance, and I'm not trying to pick on PeopleSoft, but that was a 1 year project just to get the infrastructure up and running so that the application could run. And what we offer today with things like NSX and other VMware products like vSphere is that it's a true public cloud experience, but on a private cloud. In your own data center, you can get this level of automation and tenancy that allows for these things to be done in minutes. So if somebody wants a full application stack stood up, they can automate it through the API or through automation tools like ARIA for automation, and get it done in minutes, or if even in some cases seconds, with the Kubernetes technology, the Tanzu suite.
I've always thought that I think, containers and virtualization really did drive us as network engineers to have to change. Infrastructure engineers just have to
Of
change because
course.
we couldn't keep up, to be quite frank. There was so much that was going on. There's so much development that is going on that we couldn't possibly, because especially when you look at, how politics are in an enterprise, you have these different silos, you have ITIL, you have to have change control, you're trying to do things in a safe manner. And, look, networks are complex. As you build a data center, it becomes super, super hard. So it's advantageous to try to do things more in a software defined way because it's, in my opinion, from an operation standpoint, way easier to manage than the complexities of knowing many different network operating systems and firewall operating systems and load balancing operating systems and going into looking at those interconnections. I mean, how you had all these different things that were happening. How do we in NSX do it so that it's much easier?
Yeah, so we have a really nice intent-based system. We can define the entire infrastructure in code. So you can have a JSON file that describes the networking and security requirements for your application, or even if it's not an actual application, for whatever the reason you need connectivity and security, you can define it in code, and then you can make a single API call to NSX to realize that. Or if you're the type who likes to click a lot in the graphical user interface, click, 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 as one of our peers, Dimitri, likes to say, you click a button and get a layer two network that spans your entire data center in a second. And as you mentioned, compared to way back in the ancient times, I would joke the last millennia, I remember change control. If I wanted to make a VLAN for a zone that was going to be like a HR system so I could firewall it, I mean, I had to do a change control ticket, go to change control committee, wait for them to approve it. Then I had to configure the VLAN. Not only did I configure it on one place, I had to configure it in multiple places, make sure it's trunked. I mean, all this complexity just to get a new layer two broadcast domain, as a VLAN is, just for an application. And but today with a tool like NSX, it's seconds, and it's
It's
not just seconds for one host; it's seconds for all hosts, thousands of hosts across your environment and across multiple data centers.
it's wild. Like looking back at when I first got into networking, we would have spreadsheets that we would keep track of all the different VLANs and how and you would have different
Yeah.
VLAN, schemas in
Who
different data
owned each
centers.
VLAN? Yeah.
And like, remember the times when we would create Excel sheets of like, here's a
Yes.
subnet and the first 10 addresses are allocated to this. And then
Of
the
course.
Active Directory servers are the next 5 addresses. They have to be in
Yes.
that range. Like, it's
Yes.
wild where we've come from.
1.1 through 0.9 was always your routing and switching
Yep.
infrastructure. And I worked for one place that really bugged me because they decided to make 254 their default gateway.
That was
And
the
it drove
Linux
me,
thing.
yeah, that drove me nuts because it sort of implies a /24, or if you're really antiquated, what is it, a class C network, something like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, yep, yep,
But
yep.
yeah, I mean, it's not just for the networks and the VLANs, but there's whole people used to keep their entire IPAM, IP address management stuff in an Excel spreadsheet of which subnet was allocated to which application to which project, and this stuff is all gone now. Now it's all automatic. It's all integrated into your private cloud environment. You can see all the different networks and the subnets, and you can name them, which is pretty cool, and you can auto allocate them from pools of address space. We have a built-in IPAM system in NSX. It's a very nice way of operating that is just so much more efficient. And what's great about it is that the network administrators who used to do those tickets, grind through tickets every day, they now are freed up to do really interesting projects. And those interesting projects are like building the network fabrics that are needed to support these private clouds. So, it's a great opportunity for people in networking these days to really focus on strategy and not so much that just, like I said, the grind of doing one ticket after another.
That's a really interesting thing that you bring up because I've had many conversations over the years with many different colleagues that I've worked with at different jobs, and you seem to, and still I think it's true to this day, is you have this divide where some people are very content. They're like, look, I want to work in my routers and my switches. I want to work in my firewalls, and I feel comfortable doing that. And that's how I can give back in what I do in my job. And
Yeah.
then others, they're like, look, get me out of that ticket hell, whatever you want to call it. Like, that is just not fun. I want to go on and do bigger and better things. And I'm not trying to look at the people that enjoy doing routing and switching. Look, I love it just as much as anybody else. But I think what I want to put people's minds at ease when it comes to adopting things like NSX is BGP doesn't change. DHCP doesn't change. These network concepts are still a reality, and they're just over in a software defined way. And it's much easier, in my opinion, to operate that on a day-to-day basis, which gives you more time to learn and do cooler projects.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And I mean, I'm going to pick on the people who are content doing tickets a little bit here. I mean, if your job is doing a really repetitive task over and over again, like manually making VLANs, your job is potentially going to go away, whether you like it or not. That's a risk. Repetitive tasks are easy to automate. And sometimes people don't deal with that well. And so, what we're seeing is those who evolve and want to do the more architectural level or strategy level aspects of networking are really winning in the end. They tend to get better positions in their career and succeed and stuff like that.
Do you think that, with the advent, especially of containers, has that really changed our mindset of how we think of networking in general?
That's a tough question. Um,
I asked the tough ones here.
yeah, I mean, it depends on who you're talking to, right? The persona of the person you're talking to. From the perspective of a developer, they often don't really care that much about networking. They want connectivity, of course. To make almost any application work these days, you have to have some level of connectivity. And they also need security. Often you can't get your application into production unless you have some security aspect to it. I mean, a lot of developers in the past I've seen will try to make their application real fast and ignore security. But when you got to go to prod, that's not an easy. You need security. So from the perspective of the developer, they want an easy button. They want the easiest way possible. And in the world of Kubernetes and containers, um, what's great about NSX is that we've integrated in such a way that the actual configuration of the networking and security is embedded into the description of the application in code. Like I said, infrastructure is code,
Mhm.
but now it's actually along with the rest of the application code. And so with a simple kubectl command or something along those lines, those developers can deploy their application and get that connectivity. And they don't have to worry about BGP or OSPF or EIGRP, or, well, we don't support EIGRP, but whatever it is,
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
routing protocol you choose, or even more complex stuff like BFD and EVPN. You tell a developer, oh, we got to talk about EVPN, they're going to gloss over and go, I don't want to deal with that. There's definitely a change in the perspective of networking, but it all depends on your view. For the network engineer, I mean, there's definitely a change with private clouds that has moved from this world of, monolithic stand up a machine on a VLAN, like I was talking about earlier,
Mhm.
to providing a nice infrastructure that can be consumed by your users, whether or not they're a developer or something else. And so for them, there's definitely a big shift there. I was talking to a customer yesterday here at VMware, and they were a university system. I can't say exactly who it was, but they had 4 giant campuses, 100,000 students, amazing, and they are building a self-service cloud for the university in their 4 data centers. And
Mm.
so, they have all sorts of users out there for various reasons who need to build custom applications, or for student registration systems. But it could also just be computer science class teaching cybersecurity, or maybe it's just a humanities department person who needs a VM for whatever reason. And
Sure.
so they want that self-service cloud. So from their perspective, this idea of building a private cloud was a really important and valuable thing.
Yeah, so, I think that that's number 1, a very interesting story, and I think we're starting to see that across a lot of different customers. They all want a private cloud. This isn't just,
Yeah.
back in the day, I would say, like, when you had multi-protocol BGP and VRFs and you had separation, it was looked at as more of a service provider thing. You didn't do
Yes.
that in the enterprise because it was that's changing, in my opinion. I
Oh,
think
yes.
everyone wants that now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the we first saw this idea of multi-tenancy in the service provider market, as you said, particularly in what we call the cloud service provider market. Companies like Rackspace, or IBM, when previously known as SoftLayer. They are providing a service to tenants, and so they, of course, want multi-tenancy. But what we started seeing uh, about 7 years ago, I would say, at least my experience 7 years ago, is that the larger enterprises were suddenly saying, hey, wait a minute, we need multi tenancy and private cloud concepts for our lines of business, our different users within the organization. And over time, it's gradually become more and more prevalent in the enterprise IT space. So now smaller and smaller organizations are saying, actually, we need this too. And some use it for different reasons. Some use it for lines of business separation. Some use it for just different users within the shared cloud environment. That's the true private cloud idea. Some use it for things like dev, test, prod separation. So one environment, but they have dev, test, and prod sharing the same physical resources. So it depends on the customer, but yeah, there's been a big proliferation in this private cloud concept, and this idea of multiple tenants sitting side by side on the same network fabric and using the same security infrastructure.
Yeah, I totally. Number 1, we're hitting at the 18-minute mark, going on 19-minute mark, and just want to remind anyone that's watching that you're more than welcome to ask questions. I am monitoring that, so if you have something, feel free to send it off in the chat. We're more than happy to answer questions about anything that you may have. But continuing on, so I agree, and one of the most fascinating use cases that I started hearing at my old company, I heard developers and product owners, they were saying, look, we want to be able to set up an area where we could do development and free of security rules, because we just want to be able to develop, and then we'll figure out the security policy, move it over to QA, then eventually move it over to UAT, and then finally get it over to prod. And now companies
Yep.
have different ways that they, name those environments, but it's so hard to do that in a manual sense, and you never ever get there. But with the private cloud, it makes a heck of a lot more sense. You can do it.
True. Yes. But even that is sort of, I already started to pick on your previous employer, but even that's still a little antiquated. The most progressive customers, the ones who are really doing the cutting edge stuff, they're integrating the security from day one, and they're making sure the application has security built in, even at the stage, because they don't want something where they do dev and test, and by the time it gets to, as you call it, UAT, or even for sure when it gets to prod,
Sure.
all of a sudden the security guys show up, or the security team shows up and says, hang on a second, your application's not secure. They start adding firewall rules and other stuff, maybe IDS, IPS. and suddenly the application is impacted. Either it doesn't work at all, or maybe performance changes or something like that. So we're seeing a lot of customers want to see that, you know, the the security aspects built in from day one. And it's not just security. Another one's load balancing. Obviously, like often in a dev environment, you don't really need the load balancer because your traffic is pretty low in one user because he's one person doing dev. But if you don't put that load balancer in line from day one and later add it, you don't know how that load balancer is actually going to operate with the application. So you want to build that load balancer into your network topology from the beginning. And I think this is really critical because, you know, like I said, if you go from dev to production and you suddenly add the load balancer and stuff breaks, it's going to take you much longer to get to prod. And we haven't even talked about CI/CD pipelines and all that stuff,
Yeah.
but the fact that you can add the load balancer as a software construct in NSX, and that load balancer is available to anybody who wants to use it, and you're not buying a big heavy big iron box by one of these antiquated load balancing companies to give to each developer, and you're not making them open a ticket to make a VIP on one of these big giant big iron expensive boxes. You know, it's all a big distributed load balancing system built into NSX. Uh, and so it's a much more flexible solution. I don't know.
Yeah.
You want to talk about CI/CD pipelines?
Oh, we will, but I think you hit on a very important thing is like, you know, and this is like for network engineers and, you know, security engineers, we have to get in that mindset of understanding that. The fact that if they try to develop an application, but they don't have that load balancer in front of them, they don't know how the traffic is going to be distributed. Like, how are you going to get to a world where you can dynamically expand your front end because it's dealing with an influx of traffic because it's Christmas and
Yep.
you're an online web store? If they haven't developed the application to do that, you can't just magically slap a load balancer in front of it and hope for the best. It doesn't work that way, you know?
Yeah, you're right. It's funny you mentioned that. We have a customer. Again, I'm not supposed to say customer names. Probably they may not want me to, but we have this customer who does these gift card processing.
Mhm.
So you know, you go to the store and you buy a gift card for Amazon or Home Depot or I don't know, Bed Bath and Beyond. Of course, they're gone now, but you know, you buy a gift card at the store, and this is often used around the holidays as a gift for Christmas or whatever holiday you celebrate. And what happens is the day of Christmas, everybody opens up their presents and they get out their gift cards and they want to redeem them immediately. And that all that processing is not done by those individual retailers. It's done by this one company who
Mhm.
basically matches the secret code on the back of the gift card with the dollars and maps it to the company's website that's redeeming the gift card. And they were telling me that their traffic pattern is really crazy. It's basically like this all year. And then on one day, December 25th, it goes through the roof and then it drops back down, and it's super critical because what are they doing? They're fulfilling, you know, the person who got the gift card gets to go buy the whatever the thing is that they really wanted on the online retailer. So yeah, these are definitely real situations. That's just one example, but it's very common to have sort of this spiky traffic, and having the auto scale out capabilities in not just our load balancer but also in our edge gateways. On our edge nodes we can auto scale extra edges if needed to give more network bandwidth on demand.
Yeah, you know, and yeah, I think that the what the example that I was using beforehand is a good thing for, let's say, if you're trying to take a monolithic application, turn it into a modernized app. You know, there's a lot of work to do to be able to break that down. But if you're talking about true and honest, like good development, modern app development practices, you're right. It's security at the start, it's load balancing at the start. You have to be able to develop with those components and you have to come up with them quickly. And software defined is probably the best way to do that because of how quick
Oh
you
yeah.
can respond to it. Because look, I've been on the other side of that, and it's super difficult to do it in an old school mindset. I'm amazed that we got stuff done, to be quite honest.
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that CI/CD thing. You know, I do kind of like that subject as well.
Yeah, so this is not every customer is doing this. But we are seeing customers automate dev test prod pipelines. You know, so instead of the developer doing a development environment and then being done with it for a while and it sit on the shelf and then eventually goes to test and it gets redeployed and then to prod, we're seeing more and more people basically using, say, a Git repo as the source of their application, and they'll do check-ins and then they'll do auto builds between each of the steps as you go from dev to test to prod. And particularly in SaaS-based applications where they want to release new software very quickly, and I'll bring up retailers again. We had another retail customer up in the Pacific Northwest who, they're constantly updating their website with new content because fashion changes quickly and they want to offer new stuff, whatever the latest, greatest trend is. And they can't wait for weeks or months to update their website. They want to do it hourly.
Sure.
And so they did a very nice CI/CD pipeline system where effectively a change to the content on the site can be checked in really quickly from the developer, go automatically to test, do some automated test exercises, and then ultimately get pushed to prod, so they can do updates. And so they do updates. I don't know the exact frequency, but they can do updates multiple times a day if needed to various aspects of their online store. And it's that CI/CD pipeline, that all that automation, you really couldn't do it without a software-defined data center or a private cloud data center. Because imagine if part of that was to make a firewall rule change or add a, a health check to a load balancing to a VIP, or even if you needed to make another network for some reason. That's less common there. Usually the topology is pretty set in advance for those kind of things. But those things, if you went back to the old ticketing system way of doing things, you're back to weeks or months of between content updates to a retail website. It's
Sure.
just not a modern way to do business.
Do you, and I've been saying this for a while now, and I think it's the more and more that I learn, the more and more I realize that it's got to be true. Is you know I started taking an interest in learning app development processes and agile processes and things like that. And like, how are modern apps done? How containers really work? And at first, I was wondering, am I going down the wrong path? Like, is this really going to benefit me in networking and security? But more and more I learn about it, and the more and more I can understand and sit down with the developers and talk to them about these problems, and then work with them to come up with ways that they can utilize SDN in the best way, shape, or form. Knowing that I'm not saying you have to be a coding expert, nothing like that of the sort. And I think there's a lot of fear in that, Andrew. It's like people think that they have to become coders to be able to talk to developers, but
Nope.
they do not know networking and security very well. And to be quite frank, they don't want to deal with BGP and all these different things that we were talking about earlier. They want to deal with the components that are most important with their config, and they want to look at you as more like a consultant and not someone that's just gonna, behind lock and key, you keep the firewall and the routers and the switches, and you don't talk to me. You just submit a ticket, and then I'll deal with you when I need to deal with you. It's a lot easier, and you're looked at as the developer's friend when you can actually talk to them a little bit.
Yeah. Hey, so when you started back in your career early on, you were in an IT group, right?
Sure
And
was.
were you a cost center or a profit center?
Oh, cost center, 100%.
Clearly, yeah, same here. So,
Absolutely.
right. So I remember early on realizing that when I was working in IT, that I was in a cost center, and and I don't mean to pick on it, but the best you can do is break even, right? If this network's up all the time and everything's secure, the phone doesn't ring or the tickets don't come in, and you're happy, but in the end, you're costing the company money. So now it's basically meaning the best you can do is everything's quiet.
Yep.
Yeah. So then what happens is everything's quiet. So finance says, "Oh, we could probably make some cuts over there on their budget."
True.
Right. So the bummer is if you're just a cost center, this is always going to be a problem. You're always just oh, we're spending all this money on IT. Why are we doing this? But to your point, if you can transform yourself into a business enabler, okay, so a business enabler is somebody who has something to do with how the company makes money, a profit center. If you can be a part of that, you're going to suddenly change how you're viewed by the rest of the business. So it doesn't matter what the business is, but if you can say, hey, my networking and my security contributions enable the business to make more money, that opens the door for a whole different perspective on what it is to be in IT. And so that like I'll use a weird example, but imagine your company sold cereal at the local grocery store. If you can enable more cereal box sales, that's going to be amazing to them. And it sounds mundane, but that's a big deal. But if you're just providing connectivity so the executives can get their email, I mean, it's obviously important, but that's just not the same level of contribution to the bottom line of the business in a positive way, as opposed to being a cost center.
Yeah, I think you're right. That was one of the hardest pills I ever had to swallow as a network engineer was, I essentially was told, through no matter how much I would try to say, because developers were always like, look, we're the ones that do the coding. We're the ones they are. They're the ones that make the
Yeah,
applications.
they made
They're
the
the
app.
ones that make the money. And I would go, yeah, what you wouldn't be able to do anything without us. They're like, yeah, but you just cost the company money. Like, and they try to push it back. Like every 7 years, you try to refresh your equipment and blah blah blah. Like, and then
Yep.
you're fighting for that, and you're saying like, oh well, we get all these features, yeah, but I only use 10% of it. You're like, well, you're right.
Yeah, and sadly, in the end, they just want the connectivity.
Yeah.
They don't really care if you're changing networking protocols or whatever. But if you have if you provide this private cloud experience to the developer, and by the way, the developer is not really in that much better a position. They're just writing an application that's used for whatever the business does. And
Yep.
so if you're, like I said, if it's a company that makes consumer goods that sell at retail grocery stores, the business is not writing applications. The business is selling that product,
Yep.
but the application is a means to do that more and more and more, of course. But so the developers, obviously it is important. But my point on all this is that being a contributor to the growth and revenue side of the equation is something that that modern network engineers can do by helping build these private self-service cloud environments.
It's
And I think
amazing.
that's critical for people to recognize.
I enjoy this because I always like career development conversations as well. And somehow we found a way to take cloud and turn it into your own
Into
personal
career
development
development.
into career development. See, this is what we can do.
No,
um,
yeah, yeah.
but it's true. I mean, it really is because times have I think the underlying thing that we've been talking about here is times have been changing. And is as you have companies want to develop faster and faster, the old practices and how we did things in on-prem data centers are no longer applicable. It's too slow.
Yeah, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think gone are the days when you can just go get a CCIE and double your salary. I don't think
Yeah.
that, yeah, it doesn't work that way anymore. I mean,
And
that existed at one point, but that's not the case anymore. Now, to really advance in your career, and I know we're talking about careers of network engineers or network architects, but to really advance, you really do have to focus on how you can contribute to the success of the business.
it's true. It's 100% true. And that's where things started to click a little bit more. And look, this isn't, to the audience that maybe watched it, it's like, I have a CCI. How dare you? Like, we're not
Well, good for you.
we're not
Yeah,
discrediting the knowledge there. There's a lot of good
yeah,
knowledge, and look, I was studying for it. I didn't get all the way through, but I learned a ton from that stuff, and I will always use that knowledge to this day, but I just apply it in a different way. I don't have to know every single configuration aspect of BGP or OSPF. If I need it when it's relevant, I can go and talk about it. I can go research it again. I have plenty of books and things that I can
yes.
look at it. But that trying to communicate value of multi-protocol BGP to a CEO, he does not care.
He
I
doesn't
can
know
assure
yeah, he
you.
doesn't know what that is. Yeah.
I've
Yeah, I
tried
mean,
and it doesn't
you're right.
work.
I'm not trying to pick on the CCIEs. I think it's great, but it's again, it's not the same. I'll tell you a funny side story. Many years ago, I'm going to date myself on accident here, but I was in New York City going to install some stuff in a data center there. My company at the time had decided to lease some space in this giant Verizon building on the west side in what you call Hell's Kitchen neighborhood, and
Mm,
I don't know why we picked there. It was very expensive real estate for a data center, but it was this giant 50-story windowless building that used to be a phone company building. Well,
mhm.
still was, I guess. So we were going there. It was me and one of my coworkers, and we got in a cab, and we were talking about networking. We're talking about what we were doing, and the cab driver says, "Hey, I'm really interested in this networking thing. I've heard you can make a decent living doing this." And we said, yeah, there's this thing called a CCIE. If you go out and get this certification right now from Cisco, at the time, you could basically double your salary. You could make a lot more money. And he's like, really? And he started asking a lot of questions. So we kind of politely explained how you go about getting the CCIE and how you do all that. And then he goes, "Can I get your number?" And I'm like, normally I don't know if I'd give a New York City cab driver my phone number, but he seemed like a nice guy. I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So about a year goes by, and I get a phone call, and it's the cab driver, and he goes, "I got my CCIE, and I'm now working for, I'm not going to say which big bank, but I'm
Sure.
now working for a very large investment bank in New York, and my salary is 3 times what I was making driving the cab."
Holy
I was like,
cats.
wow, yeah. And so, that was that era. But, I'm going to say that, I do think that that's kind of gone at this point. That was the era of the internet taking off and everybody needed a router and a firewall and your IP connectivity and stuff. The modern version of that is really being able to build a private cloud. The public clouds emerged. The what we call the hyperscalers.
Mhm.
They took off with people interested in having VMs there. But at the same time, the private clouds have really taken off because a lot of companies have reasons that they want to maintain their own private cloud. Whether or not it's data sovereignty or more security controls, or what, maybe it's a cost thing. Maybe it's cheaper for them. A lot of them are
Sure.
saying that these days. But if you have the skill set to build that private cloud and to be able to architect the networking fabric that forms that private cloud and gives the connectivity with things like NSX or whatever other tools, you have that opportunity to really increase your worth in the marketplace.
I 100% agree. I think that about, 5 to 10 years ago, you know, public cloud was huge and everyone wanted to go to it. Everyone wanted to get
Yeah.
a piece of it. Everyone wants to do it. Let me be clear. I don't think that public cloud is going anywhere, but I don't think on-prem is going anywhere either.
No,
I think that
hybrids here to stay for
hybrids
sure. Yeah,
hybrids here to stay. I know it
no
was a
question.
question 5, 10 years ago, like how is hybrid really gonna actually work out? Is it actually gonna stay in the marketplace? I have no doubt, but remember, I think that also on-prem staying, but it cannot be the same of what it was 20 years ago.
No, of course not. It has to evolve. And it's not just you saying that. I mean, a different customer that was here earlier this week at VMware doing one of our briefing, coming to our what we call our virtual briefing center. It's not actually virtual; it's physical. It's in person. Customers come to visit us. Anybody who's a customer listening, you're welcome to come.
It's true.
They were telling me that they tried the lift and shift to public cloud thing. They're like, okay, we're going to just take the existing application, we're going to pick it up, move it over to the public cloud. But they had some components they couldn't, like a big database that was staying on prem. And they discovered that the cost of doing that, coupled with the performance of connecting from the public cloud back to their private data center for database access, basically destroyed the application they tried to lift and shift. It didn't work.
Wow.
And so they actually went back to bringing that whole application back to private cloud. What they told me is one thing they do like about the public cloud is sort of these more advanced serverless applications, things like that. But when it comes to tried and true, what we call IaaS, infrastructure as a service, network, storage, compute, security, those kind of things, that that they were better able to service it out of their own private data center than what they could get from the hyperscalers.
Mm. So let's talk about we're gonna zoom it back just a little bit. So we've been talking about why you'd want to do a private cloud. Let's ask and I know this is gonna be a big question. How do you even start? Like like let's say a
Where do you
company did
start?
not even
Yeah.
start. Where do you start with building one?
Okay. We That's a great question. I get this question a lot. Let me use another example. There was a Canadian regional airline that we have as a customer, and they had what we call the traditional IT silos. They had the compute team, the network team, the storage team, and the security team, and they kind of bicker with each other. Oh, it's not my stuff, it's your stuff, or hand off tickets in between when they need to do something. And this airline had an application that they needed to develop that is proprietary to them. It's their secret sauce, their competitive edge. And the application is what solves a problem which they call butts in seats. Okay, that's not my term, that's their term. So when you're flying an airline, your goal is to have every seat have a human in it, right? Because, or at
Okay.
least if the ticket's sold, right? Somebody's there, because flying around big empty airplanes is quite expensive. And so they had developed their own proprietary application
Hmm,
uh, that was to get the butts in the seats, to make sure
sure.
they have optimal utilization of these airplanes. And they realized that the application was very slow to get out the door, sort of like the retailer I was talking about before. But they knew they needed to build a private cloud. And so, to your point, how do you get started?
Mhm.
And the customer, our main customer there, is a guy named Richard. And what was interesting, Richard told me, was they started out and they realized they had these different IT silos and they couldn't get along. They couldn't get along. And he admitted that he was the biggest naysayer. He was up from the security team, and he's like, this public cloud, this private cloud thing, neither the public cloud or the private, none of this is going to work. We know how to do all these things the traditional way. Why are you wasting our time? And his his boss was the CIO, and his boss kept telling him, no, 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 we need to optimize to build this application that's going to make us have a competitive edge over any other airline in the area. And so Richard at first fought back. The CIO said, and I don't remember that guy's name, but the CIO at one point says, okay, we're going to build a cloud team. And this is not a cloud team who does mega hyperscalers, management. So it's not somebody who manage AWS. We're going to build a private cloud team. We're going to build a team that's cross-functional, and it's going to take people from compute, people from storage, people from networking, people from security, form one team. And your team charter is to build the private cloud. And what's interesting is the CIO said, I want Richard, the one naysayer, the guy who didn't want to do it. You're in charge. That's your goal now. You're the guy who's going to make this happen. And of course, reluctantly, but Richard says, okay, I'll take it on. And so this multifunctional team in the end was what Richard told me was what led to their success to get started. It was that exercise of breaking down those silos and building a cross-functional team to have a common goal of building a private cloud. Now I'm answering the business side of your question. I don't. You want to go deep on the technical side? We can talk about that. How do you get started building a private cloud? Technically,
I'm gonna add on a little bit.
Okay.
That is not the first time I've heard that story where you take the naysayer in the room and you make them part of the team. You don't put them off to
or
the
leave
side.
the team.
Yeah, or even have them lead the team. Because look, I tell this story all the time. When NSXV was first dropped on me, I was a network purist. I said that I'm going to figure out what's wrong with this thing. So I dove in and I built out a lab and I went through everything. I was like, wow, this actually is pretty cool. I like this. Okay, I can see where they're going with this one. I'm all on board now. But if I would not have done that and I would have continued to be a naysayer from the side, I don't know if I ever would have accepted it, and I would have fought it the whole way because I wasn't a part of it. They didn't ask me. It's amazing how when I'm asked that same question of well, how do you take detractors in the organization and go put them on your team? And they go, what? Are they going to sabotage it? I'm like, well, they could, but that'd be a really dumb idea for them politically. I'm like, so make them part of the process. Make them have to embrace it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Richard was the biggest naysayer of that company, and he I mean, it's funny. He had the ability to admit it. He said, I thought I was, the smartest guy in the room, and my ego was huge, and I didn't need to build this private cloud thing. And then he admitted to me, I was wrong. This in the end made us successful as an airline. And they measured it, by the way. They actually could easily measure because the application was measuring the butts in the seats. And I know it's probably a funny way to say it, to call it that, but they measured butts and seats, and they could measure the success of their entire business. Back to the how do you enable the business question, they can measure the success of their entire business based on the fact that they built a private cloud to deliver this self-service experience to their users, internal users.
And I think that's something very important because yet again, to try to convey value or to prove your return on investment, especially in IT, I would refresh a data center and they go, are you done yet? And I would say, yeah, I'm done. Can't you tell all the new stuff's in there?
Can't you? We didn't notice.
You don't notice.
Again, you did a good job. There was no outage.
Yeah, there's no there. Yeah, all right. There wasn't really blockage on those uplinks anyway. I didn't really need to worry about QoS in certain situations. So I'm like, all right, well, things are they're up. I didn't bring it down.
You succeeded.
But with an application, you can actually go well, is it work? You have measurable things that you can read beforehand and afterward. If you have those, it could be as simple. It doesn't even have to be you're saying butts and seats, the deliverable of the application. It could be as simple as man, you know what? Beforehand, it took 6 months to be able to get through all these tickets to do it. Now we did it in 2 weeks.
That's right.
That's measurable.
Absolutely. I mean, we have tons of examples of this. It all there's other use case examples. NSX has this amazing DR capability where, with the product, you can recover from a disaster in minutes instead of days. And we've seen customers have to shut down data centers in emergencies and move workloads and, that kind of thing. I mean, I'm going off a bit away from the private cloud construct, but, there's the fact that it's a software-defined network and software-defined security constructs allows you to do this incredible stuff that you can never do with traditional networking, and you can fail over at any point in time. and you can fail over in minutes if you want. I mean, we have one customer who was telling me they'll actually take an entire data center outage. They'll shut down a whole data center if they need to, fail everything over to another data center because it's all software replicated, and nobody notices that it even happened. Which again, in IT, nobody notices you did it. It's kind of sometimes a good thing, sometimes it's bad, depends.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's incredible what software based stuff can do.
That's the dream because yeah, when I was consulting as a network engineer, I would go into companies. They're like, man, Andrew, we have our network set up. We know how that thing goes. It is set up. I go, all right, how confident are you on your failover? Oh man, we got it all down. I go, all right, go off at right now at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning and go ahead and shut down that secondary core and let's see how it goes. They're
See
like,
what
oh
happens.
no, we can't do that.
Yeah, need change ticket for that one.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, the confidence level just dropped.
Well, I know why. You know the old saying in IT, cause an outage to lose your job.
Yeah. No, that's true. Well,
Yeah.
but then you would hear stories about some of these mature places where they would have a chaos monkey going through and like literally destroying portions of the configuration, and just to make sure that everything was redundant, everything was right. Like
Oh yeah.
the
Oh yeah.
maturity level between companies can be massive.
Yes. Yes. I mean, there's one famous company here in the Silicon Valley for the Chaos Monkey. They
Yeah.
purposely introduce stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, all right, let's go back now to the technical side.
I
So
want to talk about
we,
technical stuff.
we talked
Okay.
about political. Let's talk about technical now.
Um, yeah. So how do you get started building a private cloud? Oh my gosh, there's so many ways to do that. I mean, one of the ways that our customers start adopting NSX is that you can easily add it to your existing what we call a brownfield vCenter deployment or vSphere deployment. So you don't have to build a net new infrastructure to do this. You don't have to go buy a whole bunch of new servers and a whole bunch of new network fabric. You can actually take your existing fabric and you can add NSX to it. And what's amazing about NSX, and this still to this day blows my mind about our product, and I know I'm tooting my own horn, but you can install 3 managers. They form a cluster.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have high availability in all sorts of parts of NSX. So we have this awesome clustering technology. These managers are just OVAs. So for all the vSphere admins of the world, if you know how to deploy an OVA, you can deploy NSX. Super straightforward. You deploy the OVAs, you form a cluster. That's your NSX manager. Then you point at your vCenter. It automatically discovers all your vSphere clusters, all your hosts, and you can then what we call prep your hosts, which
Mhm.
is slang for install the kernel modules, or in VMware's language, the VIBs. These
Mhm.
are kernel modules that go into the hypervisors. You install the VIBs that enable NSX. And you can do this without rebooting the hypervisor. And you don't have to go to maintenance mode. You don't have to evacuate the host. You don't have to do anything other than this process. The VMs, they don't even
They don't
skip
even
a
know what's going on.
yeah, they don't even know it happened, right? So once you have that installed, then it's very easy to start adopting the networking and security components of NSX because it's such an easy way to get going on your existing infrastructure. And so most of our customers, they go that approach, right? They,
Mhm.
they have this existing environment. We also have customers who start from scratch. They are doing a physical hardware refresh. They're
Mhm.
buying a whole bunch of new compute and they're deploying this in racks and stuff. And they're like, okay, we're going to build a private cloud on this. What's one of the coolest things that VMware offers is this thing called the VVD. Are you familiar with that one?
I am, but for the viewing audience, please.
Yeah, so it's the VMware Validated Design. It's our reference design, and it's basically the way to deploy the product successfully. And it's not just NSX; it's the suite of products. Most often, it's as part of what's called VCF, and VCF is a collection of vSphere plus NSX plus some other products that collectively will build you your private cloud. And so, if you use this reference, this VVD, VMware Validated Design Guide, you can successfully build what we call greenfield. Again, I'm using VMware slang. I don't know.
Mhm.
It's funny. Before I got to VMware, I never heard people talk about brownfield and greenfield so much. That seems like a very VMware thing, but
Oh
maybe
no,
I'm
no,
wrong.
I use that terminology all the time.
Oh, you guys did? Okay.
Yep.
Before you worked here? Well, either way, so we support both a greenfield and brownfield deployments of NSX, meaning you can start from the beginning with no workloads and build an environment. One of the places where we see people doing sort of the more greenfield stuff is when you're doing a new container world. You
Mm,
want to deploy Tanzu and you want to deploy it, on top of this brand new environment that you're going to build for your development teams to start doing container-based applications.
mhm.
So, I'm not a Tanzu expert. We got people at VMware who are, but my experience is that's more often something you build a net new environment. But if you're just doing a pure IS application where you're trying to get people to start using, more and more automation around networking and security, and giving people the public cloud experience on your private cloud, the brownfield approach, the existing vSphere is pretty popular.
Yeah, so what for the viewing audience, you're talking about the difference between going just purely NSX security, where you can prep the host, but you don't have to create, the virtual networking side of it. You can just do nothing but security right onto the VNix of the VMs.
True, but I'm actually going beyond that. I mean,
Oh, okay.
the first step is just prepping the host, and that puts
Sure.
all the modules, the firewall module, the bib for firewall, but it does everything else too. All the components are on the host
Mhm.
without rebooting the host. Now, what you're getting at is, okay, now you have this network that your existing network might have been based on VLANs,
Yep.
right? You're attaching VMs to VLANs or your
VLAN
DVPGs.
backed, if you will. Yep.
Yeah, VLAN back DVPGs. Hopefully, people know what all this slang is, all the lingo we like to use at VMware. Um, some in a greenfield setup, you could, well, even in a brownfield setup, you could immediately go into NSX and make an overlay network, which is our virtual. We call it different names depending on the era, but virtual wire was the old name, and then
I
logical
remember
switch.
that
Yes, and
segment
now it's
now.
segment now. Yes, so you can immediately create a segment, which is an L2 broadcast domain, but it's a virtual one. And you can put VMs on it. Now, the existing VMs that you had that are attached to those VLANs, we have a way to get them to these new NSX enabled networks if you choose to do that. You don't have to, though. You can leave them there side by side with new VMs that land directly on NSX virtual networking. And so those are options the customer has. And so we have people who leave their existing VMs on VLANs, but we also have a ton of people who will migrate their VMs. And when I say migrate, that sounds like a scary thing, but it's not
Yeah.
that hard. We have a really nice distributed bridge capability that will let you basically map a VLAN to what's called a Geneve segment. Geneve is
Mhm.
the protocol we use for what is called overlay networking. And so we can map your, VLAN 10 to an overlay segment, and then you can just rewire your VM and its hit list to the VM, or you
Mhm.
can vMotion if you want. You could vMotion to a different host, but most people it's just a rewire, and
Yeah.
it's the same broadcast domain. And when you're done moving all the VMs over to this overlay segment, you can then tear down the bridge, so you don't need to leave it up running. Or if you want, you can leave the bridge running and have a mix of VLAN back workloads and overlay backed workloads on the same segment. But more likely, maybe those systems, you just leave them, they coexist with new VMs because people are always adding new VMs. You can
Sure.
start by adding the new VM straight to the new networking components. But remember, you're probably going to automate. If you're really doing a private cloud, your users are likely, if it's a developer, they're going to be interested in automation. And so NSX supports a whole variety of automation techniques to automatically deploy VMs and attach them and provide firewall rules. And there we invest a lot in giving customers choice. And this is really important because every shop has their own choice of automation tool. Ansible, Terraform, Python scripts, VRA, sorry, ARIA for
Aria.
automation. Yes,
Aria automation.
you're getting used to that one, yeah. RA for automation, whatever it is, VRO workflows, Power CLI, PowerShell. Everybody has their preference, and
Oh,
so
yeah.
we support all these things. And the idea there is up to the customer what they want to use. We had this we call it over the top video streaming, a la Netflix kind of company that did video streaming, and they said, hey, we already standardized on Terraform with our users. Our developers know how to use it and stuff like that. And they came to us and said, we said, well, why can't you use, I don't know, VRA instead? And they said, well, you got to retrain 500 people. Oh, okay, interesting. And this isn't to knock VRA because it's a great product, but retrain for them was a big deal.
Yeah.
So they asked us if we could help them put together a Terraform provider, and we did that for them. So again, choice of automation is really important for NSX. because it's up to the customer which one is their preference. But of course, with the suite of VMware products, obviously better together is always the motto. And we
Sure.
have a good integrations with a lot of VRA. I think at your previous company, you guys used a lot of VRA automation, right?
We did, and I did
Yeah.
Python, a
Yeah,
little bit of Terraform. I did it a little bit of
you did
everything.
it all. Yeah. Okay. So exactly,
JavaScript.
you were like the classic example of a customer environment that you probably had different people who wanted different stuff, right? Even
Yep.
in your own organization. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it was impossible. Like, I know that we had, and I've seen this in previous companies and with current customers now, where I think anyone that tries to, I think that's the rare case where they standardize, with nothing but Terraform. I
Yeah,
think a
you're
lot of
right.
companies try to do that, but then when they look at the reality of the situation, there's just no way.
But this was just this dev team. It was a big
Oh,
dev
okay.
team. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, company wide, this was a huge company. They didn't have a standard either. You're right. Very few people have an actual specific standard that they mandated, that they have different teams who want different stuff. It just happened that their team chose that solution. But the point isn't whether or not it's Terraform or Ansible or VRA or PowerShell. It's that we
It's
offer
supported.
choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's supported. And and back to your original question is like, what do we do to make it easy to start building these private cloud environments? That's a big piece of it, is that you can layer that automation on top of your existing brownfield vSphere deployment. You add NSX. It's a hitless installation. You migrate some VMs if you want or not, up to you, but you layer then the automation on top of that. And now you have automation on top of NSX and on top of vSphere. By the way, there's vSphere options for all these automation techniques too, of
Of
course.
course.
So that takes care of the compute. So you have your compute, you have your networking, and you have your security. Storage is often sort of taken care of on the vSphere side. I don't think you really automate vSAN that much, at least not on the day-to-day basis. You just pick a storage location. But in the end, the customer gets this incredible ability to add automation to an existing environment without any impact to the existing running production stuff.
100%.
And yeah, it's pretty. I think it's amazing. I mean,
Yeah,
it
it's but I mean, look at, yet again, and now we're getting to the ending of the stream, but just starting off, we start off where we came from, and now we're talking about, security policy, network policy, being able to move in an automated fashion with their workloads. You're giving developers choice, you're giving companies choice of how to be able to automate it and how to be able to develop using containers or VM based. Like, the whole idea is to not have the network infrastructure, not have us as infrastructure engineers hold back the ability of the developers or the product owners to be able to move at their own pace. We want to give them
mhm.
flexibility. We want to give them options. And the way that we do that is with our private cloud offerings.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the self-service model. You're giving the user the ability to control their own destiny, but at the same time, you're protecting them. You're keeping them from their noisy neighbor next door who might be doing something else. Particularly when it comes to security.
Oh, sure.
you don't want this app developer opening a firewall rule to this other guy's app. And then on top of that, there's a provider layer. Just, I don't want to forget about this. This is really important, particularly in the security front. There's a concept of a provider layer of both networking and security, but the provider defines the on ramp, off ramp, the networking in and out of the private cloud through
Yep.
what we call tier zero, not to get too detailed on that. But they also can provide firewall rules that override the tenants, that they are evaluated first in terms of priority. And so if you wanted to block malware sites or traffic to countries that you don't do business with, or whatever thing you don't want traffic going to, the provider can make that decision and control what the tenants can and can't do. But at the same time, the tenants get their own sort of sandboxes. They can do what they want within them, and they're not noisy neighbors to the tenant next to them. So
And there's a lot of value. And, that was really hard to do in the old school way. So, you
I
know,
don't even know how you do it. A lot of VRFs.
a lot of VRFs and a lot of complexity. Private VLANs, of course. Remember that.
EVLAN. Oh yeah, yeah, sure. Good luck
But
with that one.
we could talk for hours on this. But Andrew, I'm going to see you at VMware Explore, and hopefully we're going to see the rest of the audience going out there as
Yes.
well. That's coming up. We're in August. I mean, where the countdown is here. I believe I leave on the 20th, so I'll be there on Sunday.
I will be there. I arrive on Saturday, believe it or not. We have events starting on Sunday. The main event starts on Monday and runs almost the whole week. I don't think there's anything on Thursday afternoon or Friday, but I'll be there as well. So I'll definitely see you, but I hope to see some of the people who are on this live stream. Maybe stop by our booth or sign up for one of our specific customer advisory board meetings, or come to a meet the experts, or whatever it is, we'll be around. The whole, almost half the product management team, a lot of the product management team is going to be there. So.
Yep. So, Andrew, thanks so much. I'm going to do the wrap up real quick, and I'll speak to you in just a second. So, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming on. Andrew Voltmer, thank you so much for being part of the stream, and we're going to see you next time on the VMware Networking and Security live stream. Have a great day. See ya.